All right, we're going to talk about composition of functions now, and we're going to start with some functions that are kind of different looking, and these are just functions in which we don't have a continuous line or a continuous curve. We have only a function that occurs at four specific spots or four specific points. So we have two functions that look like that, and we're going to ask ourselves, what's going to happen if we take one of these functions and place it inside the other? Or in this situation, if we start at one point, get a result, and then take that result and start at the other function at that result. So it's called a composition of function, f of g. You call it f of g. It can also be written inside, so it can be f of g of a number. So since this is f of g, and I always start with the g value, the one most inside, then I'm really going to look for what's going to happen when I take these x values for g and move all the way into the f function. So I'm going to take my first f value for g, which is 5, and I'm going to plug it in. So a 5 would turn into 7, and I would take that 7 and I would go over to the f function and I would plug it in, and the 7 would turn into an 8. So if we follow the trail, a 5 turns into a 7 and then a 7 turns into an 8, then this 5 is going to turn into that 8. And then I go over to the next function. So what's the next point I can start with? What's the next domain? I can start with a 3. So if I start with a 3, turns into a 5. The 5 goes up top, turns into a 3. So that 3 is going to start as a 3, and it's going to go to a 5 and then turn back into a 3. So as my composition, it's going to end up with 3. So I'm going to continue through all these. Same thing. I'm going to start with the next one. It's a 7. So if I start with a 7, 7 turns into 9. 9 turns into 8. So the 7 is going to turn all the way into an 8. And the last one, I start with a 9. 9 turns into 11. 11 turns into 4. So this 9 is going to turn all the way into that 4. So this would be my answer for f of g. Excuse me. So what if I did it backwards? What if instead of f of g, I wanted g of f? So that just means that I'm going to start with the f function, which is the inside one, and I'm going to finish out here with the g function. So let's take a look at it. I'm going to start with the f function. So here we go. So if I start with the f function, this is going to begin with, so what's my first value for f? It looks like it's a 7. So if I start with a 7, the 7 would turn into an 8. And then the 8 would turn into, well, there's no 8s in the starting positions down here. So this 7 doesn't have any place to go. So this point is not going to work. It's what we call undefined. So I'm not allowed to include that 7 as one of my points. So let's go on to the next point. See if there's another one we could do. So the next point is a 5. So I'll start with my 5. Go back up top. 5 is going to turn into a 3. So when the 5 turns into a 3, it comes down to the bottom, and there's a 3 right there. So the 3 is going to turn back into a 5. So I know that that point is one of the points that I'm going to be able to use. So let's see if there's any other points. Next point that I can start with, 7, 5 is going to be the 9. 9 turns into an 8. Then I go down to the bottom. That's not an 8, that's not an 8, that's not an 8, that's not an 8. Undefined. Last point I got is my 11. So let's see. 11 is going to turn into a 4. That's not a 4, that's not a 4, that's not a 4, that's not a 4. Once again, it's gone. Undefined. So it looks like the only point that I'm allowed to do g of f for is this guy right here. Therefore, my answer is that this is just the point 5, 5. And that's it.